Today, governments, institutions, corporations, and asset managers around the world are struggling to understand their future possible exposure from the financial impacts of climate change. This exposure comes from physical climate risks, as well as policy, economic, carbon, and social risk factors resulting from a transition to a low-carbon world. Riskthinking.AI generates climate risk ratings using forward-looking multi-factor scenarios, extensive climate risk data, machine learning, structured expert judgment, and a patented process for identifying, evaluating, and measuring the exposures and impacts of climate-related risks. To generate climate risk ratings, Riskthinking.AI begins by collecting and aligning global climate model data from NASA, NOAA, the Beijing Climate Center, the Canadian Centre for Climate Modeling, and more than 50 other leading atmospheric and climate research organizations from around the world. This data is spatially and temporally aligned to 48 chronic and acute risks and mapped to 33 million climate regions. These regions scale in size from 150 square kilometers down to 5 square meters and cover the entire surface of the Earth. In addition, Riskthinking.AI maps 1,700 plus socioeconomic risk variables from integrated assessment models and published shared socioeconomic pathways from organizations including NGFS, IPCC, IEA, and the Bank of England to 5 distinct macro climate-related risk factors for every time period and every climate region in the world. These macro climate risk factors include policy risk, economic risk, carbon risk, physical climate risk, and social risk. To measure each of these mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive macro risk factors, Riskthinking.AI creates indices that measures the materiality for each physical and transition risk variable for every industry, sector, asset class, and asset type. These indices enable Riskthinking.AI to stress test physical and investment assets in order to understand the magnitude of an asset's exposure to each macro climate risk factor. The results of a stress test is a distribution of scenarios that provide possible gains and losses relative to a targeted policy, global mean temperature target, or benchmark. The ratio of the downside over the upside is then used to calculate an exposure score. By algorithmically combining distributions of exposures from the 5 macro climate risk factors, Riskthinking.AI is able to generate a consistent, transparent, and fully auditable climate risk rating. These ratings enable institutions, governments, policymakers, and even asset managers to effectively understand the magnitude of financial impacts on assets and even countries from climate change over time. To identify assets that may be severely impaired or even stranded as a result of one or a combination of the climate risk factors, and to manage and even hedge risk resulting from climate change. To learn more about Riskthinking.AI's climate risk ratings, please contact us